mind their peace. All right. So here we go. Tonight, we are going to take a look at a very interesting question. First, just a quick review of last week. Let's see if this behaves. There we go. Okay, good. All right. So this class is called Explorations in Jewish Philosophy. Tonight, we're going to be looking at Pirkei Avot, the first verse of the first chapter of that text. But first, a quick review of last week. Remember, we developed the idea that Torah doesn't just mean the scroll in the closet in the synagogue, the 5 books of Moses, but that the concept of Torah can be rendered very narrowly or very broadly, depending on the context that you're speaking in. The 5 books of Moses is towards the top of the pyramid of Torah, meaning that it's a very narrow definition of Torah. It's probably the most common definition of Torah, but it's certainly not the only definition. We also have the books of the prophets and the Ketuvim, the holy scriptures like Esther and Ruth, things of that sort, and Psalms and Proverbs. Those are all part of the written Torah. Taken together, that's called Tanakh. We have the oral Torah, the oral tradition, which is Mishnah and Gemara. That together, it constitutes Talmud. And then even more broadly, the entire universe of Jewish learning, whether you're learning biblical archaeology or history, philosophy, self-improvement, Kabbalah, that's all Torah. You're studying Torah if you're studying any of those things. And then probably the most provocative thing that I say is that actually the diligent pursuit of truth wherever we can find it is also Torah, because God is truth. And so when we study biology, we're studying the nature of life. When we study physics, we're studying the nature of the universe, all of which was created by God. So admittedly, the wider the definition, or the broader the definition, maybe the less dilute the study of Torah is. But it's all Torah. All right. Anybody want to challenge me on that? No. All right. The next thing we finished up last week with ideas about why Torah is worthy of our study. And I identified 5 different things that work for me. One of them is that it's the source of our life. We said that in our evening prayers, Ki hem chayenu va'orech yamenu, that these words of the Torah are our very lives and the length of our days. And the more we study them, the better life we have and the longer life we have. The second reason, which Scott really related to, is that once you get into studying Torah, it's addictively fun. It is also the map of the minefield of life. Life is kind of a minefield, and when we go at it without any sort of guidance, then we wind up, hurting our feet, blowing our feet up when we least expect it. Bad relationships, bad money decisions, whatever. So the Torah is like a minefield of life. All the thou shalt nots are God's way of saying to us, don't step there, right? It's also the owner's manual for life. My metaphor for that is like a lawnmower or a car. If you follow the instructions in the owner's manual, you're going to get a lot of good years of use out of it. If you blow off the owner's manual and you don't change the oil, then, it's not going to last too long. And lastly, of course, borrowing from Monty Python, was that Torah gives meaning and structure to our lives. So we have a meaningful life. We don't just lead a dissolute life of accomplishing nothing except maybe a little self-indulgence. That's what we did last week. Any questions on that? Next. Comments? All right, moving on. So tonight we're going to begin our studies of Pirkei Avot. And we're really just going to dip our toes in. We're going to look at the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, but we're really only going to focus on the first phrase of the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. And I think you'll find this interesting. First of all, what is Pirkei Avot? In Hebrew, it means the chapters of our fathers. Literally, a perek is a chapter, and an Av is a father. But more broadly, the Av can also mean a principle or a category. So really what it means is it's these chapters of fundamental principles of Jewish living. And these the first it's a book of 6 chapters. The first 5 chapters are from the Mishnah. Well, I forgot my marker, my stylus. Did you grab it for me, hon? It's right by my business cards on the desk. It looks like a pen, but it's not a pen. It's gray. Thank you, hon. Anyway, Pirkei Avot is from the Mishnah, right? Which was written by the rabbis that lived around the years 200 before the Common Era to 200 after the Common Era. And that was, we discussed last week, Rabbi Judah the Prince wrote them down. It was something that was transmitted orally from Moses to Joshua, and then from Joshua to his students. And when they became rabbis, they taught it to their students. It was an oral tradition for over 1,500 years. After the Roman expulsion, Rabbi Judah the Prince realized that if he didn't write them down, they would be lost. The chain of tradition would be broken. So it's a pretty revolutionary idea, but he wrote it down. So we still call it the oral law, even though it's not oral anymore, it's written. But Pirkei Avot is part of the Mishnah of that oral tradition. All right, so let's take a look at the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. So it says as follows. It says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Umasra Yehoshua, and he transmitted it to Joshua. Masra is the same word as Misora. Have you ever heard of that word? It means tradition. Right? V'Yoshua leZakanim, and Joshua transmitted it to the elders. And the elders here mean all of the people that lived for the 350 years after Joshua died during the period of the judges in Israel. Uzkenim leNevi'im, and from the judges of Israel to the Nevi'im, the prophets, like the earliest prophets. We talk about, Isaiah and Jeremiah, they're later prophets, but to David and to Solomon and all of those guys. And the Nevi'im, Masur la'anshe Knesset HaGedolah, and they transmitted to the men of the Great Assembly. We'll talk about them later. And the men of the Great Assembly had 3 things that they wanted to say about what they felt was their mission statement. But I just want to give you some historical context. I know this is a very difficult slide to look at and understand. I don't expect you to know it, but I love this slide, and I'll be coming back to it again and again. And if you'd like, I'll send it to you so you can study it much more closely. But it is a timeline of Jewish history. Thank you. I appreciate that, sweetheart. Thank you.
Can you share it on the screen?
I'm sorry?
Can you share the slide?
I will share the slide. Yes, I'll send it to you. Send me an email if I don't have you on my email list. Now, the thing is, we just said.
Are you able to see it?
What?
Are you screen sharing?
Yeah, I'm screen sharing. Everybody can see it.
Okay.
At home.
No.
Right? Everybody can see this?
No, I can't see it.
No, I can't see it either.
We can't see
What?
it.
Hold on a minute. You should be screen sharing. You cannot see my screen?
Nope.
We can see you though.
Wait a minute. Well, let me do this. Let me see if this is any better for you guys.
Share the doc.
Can you see it now?
Share the software. Share the software instead of the. Share.
Last week this worked fine. Can you guys see my screen now?
No.
Not yet.
Nope.
Oh, wait a minute. Who said yes?
No, not yet.
All right, hold on one second. I think I messed up. Yes, I did mess up. In Zoom, I have to share my screen.
Yes.
Hold on. How do I do that?
Yeah. Share. No. The green dot. Yeah.
Share. There we go. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Share the application.
Okay. There you go. Everybody should be able to see me now.
It's coming
Got it.
up. Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you.
my apologies. That was my bad. That was my bad. Okay. Now you can all see.
Wow.
Thanks.
Okay. So now let's come back to the slideshow.
Right.
Okay. Now you can all see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Okay, good. I apologize for that. I'm still just getting used to the
No
tech.
problem.
All right. But this timeline obviously is very dense. But I just we just said that Moses transmitted the tradition to Joshua, and Joshua to the Zakanim, to the elders, and the elders to the Nevi'im. So this is this period of time. Let me see how to do this. This isn't working. Well, we're talking about the area of from around where it says between the patriarchs and the judges, the time of Moses and Aaron, approximately 1250 years ago, and through the kings and the prophets. That is the time frame in Jewish history of the beginning Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. Okay. But I want to talk down tonight on the first phrase of the Mishnah. It says Moshe received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Now, we say this and we take it as, if you'll forgive the phrase, gospel truth. And up until about 150 years ago, it was just that. Nobody really doubted the historical veracity of that. In fact, in our prayers, when we hold the Torah up on the days that we read the Torah, we do this incredibly dangerous thing called Hagbah, which is we lift this 40 to 60 pound Torah high up in the air. We open it so you can see the writing inside. We do a 360-degree pirouette, and we say these words, which is based on Deuteronomy 4, verse 44, Bizot HaTorah. And this is the Torah, Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Israel, that Moses placed before the children of Israel, Al Pi Adonai, from the mouth of God, Biad Moshe, through the hand of Moses. Now, Judaism is, generally speaking, dogma averse. We don't like things that you have to believe on faith. All right? Very, very few things in Judaism are you asked to believe on faith. If you're a Roman Catholic, you have to believe a lot of things on faith. You have to believe in the virgin birth, that Mary was born, had no original sin, and you have to believe that she was inseminated while she was still a virgin, and you have to believe all these different things, that, when you take the wafer, that it becomes the body of Christ, and all these different things you have to take on faith. Judaism is not comfortable with that, and we have very, very few dogmatic statements. This is probably as close as we get to dogma in Judaism as anything else. So that was taken to be pretty much a fact until about 150 years ago. Enter Julius Wellhausen. Anybody heard of him? Okay. Julius Wellhausen was a professor of biblical literature in Germany. And he was a Lutheran, and in 1878, Wellhausen published a text called Prolegomena to the History of the Ancient People. And basically, this text was shook the theological and philosophical world of his time to its roots.
JEDP.
Yeah, exactly correct. And what he basically said was that the Pentateuch, our Torah, the 5 books of Moses, was not written by a single author, but in fact was written by several different authors over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years, and that it was stitched together by an unknown editor and called it the 5 books of Moses, and that the Jewish people have considered this book to be divinely authored since that time. But really, it's based on a bunch of different fragments and narratives. Now, the reason this was so revolutionary, we have to remember the historical context of the time. Just a few decades before, Charles Darwin had published The Origin of Species. And there was a sense in Victorian times that emerging science could answer all the big questions. Everything would be given to a rational explanation. Mysticism was dead. We were solving, we were curing diseases with science and with reason and with medicine. And this was considered the scientific approach to biblical analysis. It was very scientific, and anything scientific was considered very, very important. So basically, he said that there were four main authors of the Pentateuch. One was the J was the Yahwist, the E is the Elohist, the D is the Deuteronomist, and P is the priestly writer. So let's break that down. Who was the Yahwist? Well, if you're familiar with the Hebrew, there's two main ways that we refer to God in the Pentateuch and the 5 books of Moses. One is the Yud He Vav He name, the 4-letter name of God, which we Jews don't actually say out the way it's written and vowelized because it's too holy. Okay, but the Catholics and the Christians refer to that name as Yahweh. From Yud He Vav, they Wi's the V, right? They say Yahweh, and Elohim is the name of God, even though it looks like it's plural, it's not, and it bespeaks God's. El means power. That's why our Muslim cousins call their God Allah. It's the same name. It betokens power. But these two different ways to refer to the God that really has no name appear in different places in the Torah. So Wellhausen's thesis was that anywhere that there was the name Yud He Vav He, that was written by one guy. And there was another author who used the term Elohim. And so, and of course, there was the Deuteronomist, who he called, which is a different book, the book, and because we see that it repeats a lot of the things in the earlier books. And then the most revolutionary thing he said was that there was a priestly author, and the priestly author was primarily responsible for the book of Leviticus. So if we take a look at this, this was his theory, this hypothesis. It looks like a barcode, but if you take a look at the book of Leviticus, it is primarily written by P. And if you take a look at Elohist, you can see primarily he's in the book of Exodus, a little bit in Genesis. The Yahwist is primarily in the beginning of Genesis. Bereshit bara Elohim. So from this, he deduced that these are all different authors holding different pens, and these fragments developed independently, and that at some point, R, the redactor, stitched them all together into a cohesive whole. That is why
Nehemiah, right?
I'm sorry?
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Ezra and Nehemiah, if some people say Nehemiah was Ezra, but the proposition in Wellhausen's time was that perhaps Ezra the scribe, who lived at the beginning of the Second Temple period, he was R. And he stitched this all together. All right. One of his proofs, for example, is that the second chapter of Genesis differs in many substantive details from the first chapter of Genesis. And he says, two different authors. Makes perfect sense. This one's account of creation. This one's this guy's account of creation. This was the theory. And it took the world by storm. So I don't like to put a whole lot of text in these slides, but this was so important, I want to read it. The key thing is Wellhausen's 3 sources, J, E, and D, were pre-exilic, meaning that they were ancient before the Babylonian exile. P came along much, much later in Roman times. So according to Wellhausen's theory, the texts that were stitched together from the J fragment and the E fragment and the D fragment reflected the life of ordinary people, whereas P, which was a post-exilic priestly creation, reflected the age in which it was composed, meaning in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Roman rulership over Judea, not that of an earlier biblical era it purported to describe. The formation of the desert theocracy attributed to Moses was a clever creation of the scribes, the rabbis of the Second Temple period, who projected backwards in time the thoughts and institutions of their own day. Wellhausen saw the legalism in the strand of tradition, which, by the way, is modern traditional Judaism.
Rabbi, excuse me for
Yeah.
one moment. Could you increase the display on the bottom right corner just a little bit?
Can I increase it?
Yes, on the, we're 78%, just knock it up a notch.
I'm not sure I can do that from here. Do you know how to make the slide bigger?
On the bottom right corner where it says 78%, you can grab it and just push it up a little bit.
It's in presentation mode.
Yeah, that's not that. I think that's something you have to do.
Nick's an IT guy.
Can everybody else see the slide all right?
You have to,
It's pretty small. Now you would do that on the bottom right corner where it says 78%. You could grab that and increase it a tiny bit.
I don't
he's
see.
in presentation mode, so he can't change the size.
I'm
Okay.
You're sweet.
I mean,
He's in live presentation.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think I can do that. All right, anyway, I'm going to continue reading. This is key. Wellhausen saw the legalism in this strand of tradition, the P, which came much later, according to him, as a deviant expression of a healthy religion founded on spontaneity and joy of worship and prophetic ethics. In other words, J, E, and D for Wellhausen were authentic ancient Judaism. He, who imposed all the laws of Judaism and all the strictures and all the temple rites, was considered fraudulent. P's religious framework was an irregular product of history, was an aberration that took the soul out of religion and spoiled morality. Its outlook of guilt and gloom constituted the building blocks of Pharisaism. Now, remember, in the New Testament, the Pharisees are the bad guys, and the Pharisees are the rabbis. Wellhausen's conclusion was that Judaism's halachic system delivered a final blow to religious authenticity by degrading the ethical lessons of Israel's prophets and by compromising the common sense morality of the Hebrew Volk. Wellhausen's reconstruction of biblical religion confirms Spinoza's proposition that Christianity was the valid spiritual heir to the religion of biblical Israel. In Wellhausen's view, the priestly Torah, followed by the Pharisees, sidetracked the natural evolution of Israelite religion, and Christianity essentially recaptured its essence.
Yeah.
Okay? So,
Rabbi, the fact is that the Christian religion evolved and changed. There were new books added over 300 years.
mhm.
So
We'll discuss that
they
a little
don't
bit
get
later.
the prize for authenticity.
But yeah, but let's understand.
Is that your own prose, by the way?
I'm sorry.
Is that your own prose?
No.
No, it's a quote. It's a quote from an article. Sorry,
Oh, I just wondered because it.
I can find the article for it. It's on a website called Torat.com. So the consequences of the Wellhausen theory were very, very far-reaching. So it was immediately adopted and it spread like wildfire. The first consequence of the Wellhausen theory, this higher criticism of the Torah, was that it created a Christian theology. It enabled a Christian theology independent of the Old Testament, meaning that the Old Testament has always been problematic for Christians in the sense that without the Old Testament, the New Testament makes no sense. Everything that Jesus did in the Gospels can only be understood in the context of what preceded it. And if you don't understand the book of Isaiah, and you don't understand the temple service and the temple sacrifices, what goes on in the New Testament makes no sense. The problem with the Old Testament for Christians is that there's no explicit reference to Jesus anywhere in the Tanakh, anywhere. They infer references, but there's no explicit reference to Jesus. Particularly the Lutherans. Now, this didn't bother the Roman Catholics that much because the Roman Catholics, up until a couple hundred years ago, did not allow Catholics to study the Bible. Most Catholics throughout the age when the Catholic Church dominated were illiterate. They would come to church and they would be read the Bible by the priest. He told you what it said, and he told you what it meant. Nobody was going around reading the Bible independently. In fact, in Islam today, 2/3 of the Islamic world is illiterate, and they go to the mosque and the imam reads to them what he chooses to read to them from the Quran, and the parts that he doesn't read to them, they don't know about. After the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, one of the big points of the Protestant Reformation was that the reformers felt that all Christians have the Holy Spirit on them, and they're free to read the Bible and interpret it as it seems appropriate to them, which was a very revolutionary idea. One of the reasons, by the way, that Jews, for example, were welcomed in Holland was because the Dutch reformers wanted to learn Hebrew so they could read the Old Testament in the original. So they welcomed Jews in Amsterdam until very recently.
And
Cromwell as well, right? Cromwell in England invited the Jews back for the exact same reason. Because the Protestants wanted to learn Hebrew. Who better to learn Hebrew from than the Jews? But this created a situation where the Lutheran theologians, if the Old Testament was discredited, then it opened the possibility to create a constructed theology for Christianity independent of the Old Testament, which they have been seeking to do since the 16th century. The
Rabbi,
Old Testament was Jewish, yes.
the Christian reformers felt that the Catholic religion was paganistic. And what the reformers did was that they Judaized the Catholic religion to make it a little more like the Jewish religion.
Well, in fact, that's true. Yes, Rob. Yeah, the thing, I mean, that's a subject for a whole nother discussion. But the fact is that I think it was the Vilna Gaon who basically said that Christianity is a hybrid of a Jewish father and a pagan mother. And I could develop that theme, but we don't have the time tonight. But what the reformers did is exactly right. They tried to eradicate the pagan elements of the Roman Catholic Church. That's what Luther did.
But the break from Judaism happened long before that in the early Christian development with the apostles, and it was written years after the events.
That's exactly true.
But
that's exactly true.
Paul, and this Paul was the one that said no kosher, no circumcision, no.
Right.
So the break, this is classic, and this is psychology, sociology. When someone wants to start something new, the first thing they do is say what we're not. We're not like them. We're not like them. Not like them. And then they evolve and they get their own shtick.
Right.
You know, it takes time, and all religions seem to do it. Even Islam has done the same thing.
Yeah.
They start out defining themselves by the other.
That's
So-
true. That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Moving forward, though, the key thing about the Wellhausen theory was that it freed everybody from the burden of Mosaic law. Okay, the Mosaic law was no longer authoritative. It was a refutation of Jewish exceptionalism. If the Old Testament was not valid, the Jews are not the chosen people. And the church had been saying that from the beginning. The church was the new Israel. And at least, having been educated at Georgetown, I know more about Roman Catholicism than I do some of the other Protestant denominations. But the Roman Catholic Church only eliminated references to the church being the new Israel at the Vatican Council II. And except I was at Georgetown for Christmas Mass to check it out, and they referred on Christmas Eve to the church as the new Israel. So that idea just continued to linger. Most Protestant denominations, as well as the Catholic Church, no longer proselytize directly to Jews. The Baptists are a big exception to that. They modified their theology to say that the only way to the Father is through the Son, but they say that that's an exception for the Jews. They have a direct line to the Father. But okay, but the point is that the Wellhausen theory was refuted the idea of Jewish exceptionalism, which was very, very handy for the Christians. It also, as we saw from that quote that in the article, it was a form of Christian triumphalism, that they are supersessionists. There was an idea that Christianity had replaced Judaism, and if we could discount the Old Testament as an authoritative source, it supported the idea that Christianity had in fact replaced Judaism as the favored way of worshiping the God that created the universe. But wait, there's more. It destroyed the veracity of the Torah as history. Ever since then, anything the Torah says on a historical level is considered to be suspect. There was a time in the 20s and 30s that people thought, academics assumed that David never existed just because the Tanakh says it doesn't. What proof do we have independent of that suspect text? And it wasn't until the establishment of the state of Israel and archaeology started happening in Israel on a very, very large scale that we began to find archaeological and other proof of the existence of people like David and Solomon and the first temple and on all of these things, which anything that was said in the Torah was considered to be historically nothing more than a narrative. Yes.
With one exception, the couple being all of the scholarship that William Foxwell Albright provided.
Yes, but even, for example,
And even Samuel Noah Kramer, I mean, Hassan Kramer.
we're saying even before that, look at the accounts of the flood. Before we were able to do archaeology, it was considered just a narrative, a myth, that many cultures in that region of the world shared a common myth. But it was not grounded in objective reality.
Okay.
And what the Wellhausen did was to reinforce that idea that anything in the Torah is suspect because it's just fragmentary narratives. It's somebody's opinion. A narrative is just something I write. Who am I? The other thing it did is it undermined the authority of biblical law. This is huge. And I referred to this a minute ago, that we no longer felt constrained by the laws of Moses. If a bunch of dead white men wrote these fragments, then we are under no obligation to keep them. If they're not, there's no divine authorship here. They're just a bunch of nice ideas. And it turned the text into a mere narrative. This is really, really important because modern Christian scholars will concede reluctantly that the four Gospels are not history. They are narratives. And they were, as Barry mentioned, some of them were written 20 years after the events. Some of them were written as far out as 75 and 80 years after the events. And what is a narrative? Ralph tells a story around the campfire, and people hear it, and then they go and they tell it again at the next campfire, but they embellish it a little bit. And the story becomes embellished with each retelling, and it becomes twisted and modified and augmented. So the Gospels that were written at farthest away from the time of the events are the ones that are most fantastical. All of the miracles, the three earlier Gospels, Mark, Luke, and Matthew, they're called concordant Gospels because they more or less, as we say in Yiddish, stell up. The Matthew, according to John, is the one that has the most fantastic stories about Jesus, and it was one that was written the farthest out. But now, if the Gospels had to be narrative, they said, well, it may be narrative. Our book may be narrative. That means your book is just a narrative too. It's just a bunch of tales around a campfire. It has no authority whatsoever. And the biggest blockbuster is the Wellhausen theory was enthusiastically embraced by the Reform. It is a core to this day of Reform theology, Reform Judaism, that the Torah is just a bunch of suggestions And it was not written by God. It was written by a bunch of really smart people. If we don't want to follow it, we don't have to follow it. And all of the strictures in the Torah are not applicable in this day and age.
The reform movement was started in 1860 something in Ohio, right? Cincinnati, they had the big thing.
Actually, it started earlier in Germany.
Yeah. But the conservative movement started at that convention in Ohio because they served shrimp.
That's correct. That's correct.
Cincinnati, yeah, that was.
That's correct. So this is some of the consequences of the Wellhausen theory. So having said all that, of course, people rose to the defense of Torah. And let's take a look at some of the refutations of the Wellhausen theory, but it made its impact. Okay, it absolutely changed the entire landscape of biblical study. Okay, I wish James Seabrook was with us tonight because he could probably speak to this as well. Let's talk about Rabbi Solomon Schechter. If you were paying attention in my Rosh Hashanah Drush, he was in 1902, who was brought from England to be the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Deeply religious man. He was brought in precisely to counter the reform in America. The JTS, there was no conservative Orthodox distinctions. It was traditional Judaism, which was a minority, and there was the reform movement, which was taking over American Jewish communities by wildfire. And so they brought him from Europe in the hopes that he could establish a beachhead for traditional Judaism in America. He wrote, higher criticism equals higher anti-Semitism. He rightly understood that the Wellhausen theory was not just an attack against the Jewish book, it was an attack against the Jewish people themselves. And he, again, I hate putting gobs and gobs of text. This is what he said. This is in Solomon Schechter's words. It must be clear to everybody that the new century does not open under very favorable auspices for Judaism. Our scriptures are under constant object of attack. Our history is questioned, and its morality is declared to be an inferior sort. And that, of course, is all the consequences that we discussed of the Wellhausen theory. Worst of all, he goes on about the attitude of the younger generation that adopt this idea because it's common in society. He says because by dint of mere ignorance, sadly indifferent to everything Jewish and incapable of taking the place of their parents in the synagogue. The Bible is our patent of nobility, he wrote, granted to us by the Almighty God. And if we disown the Bible, leaving it to the tender mercies of those beautiful souls working away, diminishing the nimbus of the chosen people, the world will disown us. This intellectual persecution can only be fought by intellectual weapons. And unless we make an effort to recover our Bible and to think about our theology for ourselves, we are irrevocably lost from both worlds. I think the both worlds that he is referring to is the world of academia, as well as the world of spirituality. Very, very powerful words from one of the first chancellors of JTS in refutation of the Wellhausen theory. I want to introduce you to another rabbi who was a staunch warrior against the Wellhausen theory. His name was Rabbi Dr. Joseph Herman Hertz. He was born in Slovakia in 1872. In 1884, his family moved to New York. In 1894, he received his PhD from Columbia University. That same year, he became the first graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary's Rabbinical School. That was some 8 years before Solomon Schechter came to New York. And from 1913 to 1946, he was the chief rabbi of the British Empire. He was considered Orthodox in every way, and he had a smicha from JTS. He wrote or edited a copy of the Torah, which you will recognize if anyone is familiar with the Hertz Chumash.
Yes.
It was the standard biblical text in synagogues for 50 years. From the 1930s until the 1980s, every Orthodox and conservative synagogue used that Chumash. There was no other. And Hertz was agitated that the Wellhausen's documentary hypothesis will compromise the religious integrity of the Torah text as a divinely inspired document. He published this book primarily to instill a sense of pride in that generation, to say, hey, be proud of the Torah, be proud of our laws, be proud of our holidays. It's not BS. It's not Wellhausen's theory. And having them appreciate and observe the mitzvot as interpreted by the rabbis. That's why he published that edition of the Chumash.
That's why the commentary at the bottom of those pages is so important.
It's exactly right. He brings, well, what we're going to see.
In two ways, right? The interpretation of the written, and then he has the commentary at the bottom.
Exactly.
Beautiful thing.
And what does he do? He takes several thrusts in this book to rehabilitate the Torah as being written by a single author. And the first thing he does is resolve the contradictions in the Torah narrative. Meaning there are contradictions in the Torah. Like we just talked about chapter 1 of Genesis, chapter 2 of Genesis. A big part of the Talmud is resolving these conflicts. And he says it doesn't necessarily mean for Wellhausen, if there's a contradiction, it means, oh, this is author A, and this is author B. Problem solved. But he said, not so fast. It's not as simple as that. For example, we have very famously in 10 Commandments in Exodus, it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy, it says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, to observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. If it was the same utterance, there's a contradiction there. And the Talmud deals with it. And he brings ways to resolve these contradictions in the narrative without having to resort to the idea that it was two different authors. Next thing he does is one of his big arguments is that the historical integrity of the Torah. Every single one of our heroes in the Torah, including Moses, the greatest prophet that ever lived, have feet of clay. Moses messed up. Abraham messed up. Isaac messed up. Jacob messed up. Everybody messed up. Nobody was perfect. That itself, he argued, is a very subtle proof to the integrity of the historical text. David messed up. Solomon messed up. Everybody made mistakes. Nobody was perfect. In the New Testament, who's perfect?
Only one.
Only one. In Islam, who's perfect? They have no fault, right? In our book, and we were just talking about this in the Parsha class on Monday night. We talk a lot about Ishmael, and we give him a lot of praise and a lot of credit. Not so in the Quran for Isaac. Okay, so he said just the mere fact that the Torah calls out the Jewish people for their mistakes, for their errors, for their lack of faith, is in itself a testament to the integrity of the book. Because any author worth his salt would have erased those parts out of the book. It makes us look bad. Yes.
I mean, isn't that very quality that made it so attractive to generations and generations of Protestants? You look at it and says, that's us.
We have so much to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, right?
It
This-
comes up
yeah.
every year at Passover. We're going through the stories. It says, of all the stories, of all the origination stories, slavery? Come on, we can do better than that.
Right.
Like why would you? Humility, I guess, the lesson. But why would you start the beginning of a people as slaves?
Yeah.
As low as you can get.
Well, not only that, I mean, well, I happen to write about this. I mean, but Abraham is shown in not once but twice behaving not very gallantly. In chapter 12 and in chapter 20 as well. But it took the Enlightenment to get rid of not to say it in French, the droit de seigneur. I mean, where you see in the Bible that if you don't respect the conjugal rights of the weakest member of the society collapses. What did you do this to me? I never.
Right.
I didn't even touch her. It says, and then.
Sarah.
Yeah, it's about Sarah.
It shows it twice.
Right. It happens twice with Abimelech and with Pharaoh. All right, moving on. Hertz also brings a lot of linguistic proofs, linguistic evidence, looking at the Code of Hammurabi, looking at other Near East cultures, and comparing their language to the language that we see in the Torah. makes it very clear that the places Leviticus around 1400 before the Common Era, not 100 after the Common Era, as Wellhausen states. The linguistic evidence by the use of the words, the structure of the words, borrow words from Egyptian, borrow words from Babylonian, make it very clear that there was cross-pollination very, very, very early on, not later.
Marilyn Robinson talks about this a lot.
Yeah, it's a very important point. Archaeological proofs of a single author of the Torah, especially after the Egyptian archaeology boom from 1880 to 1920, and they found all the glyphs, and they found references to the Jewish slaves, and they found all of this archaeological evidence that seemed to support the historicity of the Torah, that it was not written in a fragmentary way over the course of hundreds of centuries, but that it was actually a unified whole. Okay. Now, there were also structural proofs. One of the things that, for example, we're looking here at the account of the flood. And what this is called chiasm. And according to Wellhausen, there were two accounts of the flood, and they were stitched together because there's a lot of repetition. But if you actually look at the structure of the narrative in the Torah, it starts off with it's like a mirror. Okay, you see A is a mention of Noah, and then A prime is a mention of Noah, and then B is mentions Shem and Ham and Yafet, and then B prime right before Noah at the end of the narrative mentions them, and you can see that there's actually a parallelism in this narrative structure. If it was written by multiple people, this structure would not exist. This is clearly a structure that was designed and intended by one author. And we have chiasm all over the Torah, all over the Torah. In fact, it's very interesting that some of the parsha breaks are specifically where the chiasm breaks are, how the rabbis broke up the parshiot. This could not be done if it was stitched together, okay? We also have logical proofs. Logical proofs meaning as follows. What did we say at the beginning? We said that there was a J editor, or a J writer, an E writer, a P writer, a D writer, and the great editor. Well, the J writer only wrote God's name is Yud He Vav He. And the E writer only wrote God's name is Elohim, Bereshit bara Elohim. Okay? Well, let me submit to you a verse. Chapter 2, verse 4 of Genesis. It says, Eila toldot hashamayim v'haaretz. These are the generations of the heavens and earth. B'hi baram, when he created them. Bayom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. When God Hashem made the earth and heaven. What do you see in that verse?
Elohim.
What else?
I don't know.
You see them both together. They're juxtaposed in one verse.
Substitute.
So how could that have been written by two separate people? It blows the water out of the theory. And there are other verses like that as well. All right, coming back to this idea. We also have this idea of the redactor, the editor, the big editor that somehow stitched together these fragments, called them the 5 books of Moses, and somehow peddled the idea to the entire Jewish people all over the planet that this was one book. Now, think about the logic of that, because presumably different communities, Jewish communities in different parts of the world, were in possession of different fragments. So how was it that the editor managed to, it's an amazing marketing trick, to get every single Jew on the planet to agree that this was all one cohesive book?
Before the internet.
Huh? Yeah, before the internet. So the big question was, who was R? So as Frank mentioned, as Ralph mentioned, the Wellhausen presumed, notice it's very important, that he has no identities for any of these mysterious people, but he assumed that R, the redactor, was Ezra the scribe at the beginning of the Second Temple period. However, again, through studies of the language of the Torah, it became very clear that Ezra could not possibly be the redactor. It had to be somebody much earlier. And now biblical academics say, well, guess who it was? Moses. Okay. So, all right. So he was the redactor, must have been, right? But by the way, that blows the water out of the case that the priestly author lived in the time of the Second Temple.
Moses' time, nothing was written. You had to chisel it out of stone. They didn't have, they didn't have.
Sure they
paper.
did.
They had paper?
So
Papyrus?
yeah, they did.
Parchment?
They had papyrus.
Ink?
Yeah. Look at
Most people were illiterate. I mean, the structure of the language had not really.
that's one of the amazing things about Judaism is that since we are a text-based faith, throughout Jewish history, we've had the highest rate of literacy of any people on the planet, because we need to be able to read to understand how to live our lives. The other question that we have is, how many authors were there? We know of 4, according to Wellhausen, but I can tell you PhDs have been written since 1878, that there are now over 200 fragments and 200 authors of the Pentateuch, of the Chumash. So it's a joke. I mean, it's just a joke. And the other thing I want to leave with just a couple other ideas. This notion that the redactor somehow peddled the idea. I know you Jews in Yemen, you had the Deuteronomist document, but I'm going to give you a much bigger document, and I want to sell you on the idea that this is the real Torah, your document and all the other stuff. And somehow this redactor was able to do this amazing feat of marketing, and it worked. I mean, I want to ask you all a question. Have you all been to a synagogue board meeting? Can 2 Jews agree on anything? Where there were 3 million people that stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and observed the same event. And yet we don't have 3 million Torahs. We don't have a Sephardic Torah. We don't have an Ashkenazic Torah. More on that in a minute. Christians have the 4 Gospels, which they concede are narratives. But in fact, there aren't 4 Gospels. Do you know how many Gospels there are, anybody?
No, this is just 2. I mean, there's the Q part that I mean, Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Actually, there are over 80 Gospels.
Oh, my goodness.
There are Gnostic Gospels. There are feminist Gospels. There were Gospels that were written after the death of Jesus, much closer to the events. These Gospels were considered heresy and banned by the church. They picked the 4 that comported most closely with Orthodox Catholic belief. But there are 80 versions of what happened in the ministry of Jesus. 80. The Quran, it's only been around for 1400 years, but there are actually 7 textual variants of the Uthmanic Quran, and Islamic scholars freely admit that transcription errors have crept into the text in the last 1400 years. However, after 3,337 years, there's only 1 variant of the Pentateuch. Go anywhere on the planet. This is a picture of a synagogue in India. It doesn't matter where you go. You will find the same Torah. There's not a letter out of place. There's not an extra word. The Talmud doesn't record a verse that we don't have. There's only 1 Torah. We have intact Torahs going back 1,200 years. There's not anything that's missing. We have fragments like the Dead Sea Scrolls that go back 900 years before that. There's no surprises in those texts. It's the same Torah. And like I said, 3 million Jews, it's amazing that there isn't an Ashkenazic Torah, a Sephardic Torah, a Taimani, a Yemenite Torah, that, mistakes or variants creep in. But if you've ever spent a day with a Jewish scribe writing a new Torah, you would see how impossible it is for a Torah to develop a variant. If there's any variation at all as it's being read, the Torah is considered invalid and you're not allowed to use it. It's just inconceivable. So in closing, we have essentially deconstructed the Wellhausen theory. Even though our Reform brothers and sisters still hold of it, it has been discredited by most biblical scholars, Biblical archaeologists have long ago discarded it as a starting point for understanding the archaeology that they find, which leaves us to the idea of where we started with a single author of the Torah. As we say when we lift it up, this is the Torah given by God. Now, so far, all I've done is prove to you that there's a single author of the Torah. God willing, next Wednesday night or next Wednesday, we're going to change it to daytime. I'm going to attempt to persuade you that that author is none other than God himself and not Moses, who was a very clever guy. Okay? Any questions, comments, observations?
A lot, a lot, a
Great
lot.
story.
Go ahead, Nick.
I just said a lot to comprehend.
Scott?
I feel like I'm back in class.
It was great. Initially, I was worried.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to support all that crap.
I was worried that we might have to have an exam. I was like, oh my gosh.
No, you're auditing. Don't worry. This is just for fun. But I love discussing these questions and analyzing them and thinking hard about them and coming to some logical conclusions. Roberto, were you going to say something?
No, I was just gonna ask you, you're gonna change the time for next Wednesday?
There's been a lot here in Pensacola. There's been a lot of requests to move these classes to daytime because we have an older group here. They will still be recorded and they will still be available. If you want to get hold of me through Barry and Lori and get me your email, I'll make sure that you have copies of these classes by the recorded ones.
Daytime, by
Okay,
daytime
thanks.
today or?
Probably middle of the day.
Lunchtime.
Well, I think I set it up 12:30. So the new schedule for classes is going to be Monday afternoon 12:30 for Parsha, Monday night for Crash Course in Reading Hebrew, Wednesday at 12:30 for philosophy. Tuesday afternoon, Sheila's going to be starting her program for cooking for people with special needs. That's we got together with Mitzi on that. We're going to make that happen in the next few weeks. So Monday lunch, Tuesday lunch, Wednesday lunch, you're going to be sort of covered in shul. And we'll move forward that way. And I'm still, I'm open to your feedback in terms of either content or scheduling. I'm trying to make the most people happy as I can. You can't make everybody happy, but I try to get the biggest swipe. Okay. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope it was interesting. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Why is it Vezot instead of Vazeh? Why is it plural?
Because Torah is a feminine word. So Zot is just it matches the gender. Okay, I think that's it. So now
Thank
I've
you.
got to end this.